MOFI became just an SPV that was a registry for government investments. But there was no organization, there was no governance structure, there were no rules of engagement, there were no processes that will help us to get to the promised land. And as a result of that, we ended up with a lot of those entities that either became moribund, some of them never even took off, they suffered stillbirth, and then even those that were in existence were effectively zombie companies. They were just tagging along and depending on government for their survival. But they didn't really deliver any value. I always use the example that there is an entity that was created 30 years ago with $80 million US dollars, not Zimbabwean dollars, and $80 million of debt. It turned 30 this year. Not a single kobo of dividend was ever paid during that period to government. In fact, government shareholding has reduced significantly to no more than 20%. The actual value of that shareholding is not up to $5 million. Can you imagine how abysmal that is? $160 million 30 years ago. Can you imagine if you had just placed that in a savings account, what you would have achieved? And even the mandate itself is doubtful as to whether or not that mandate was delivered on. We have other companies as well that effectively ended up where we spend a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. If you were to project their current values today in terms of net asset, in terms of profits, they will never in their lifetime pay back the debts that was used to set them up. One of them, we used $420 million to establish it. The maximum it has ever delivered in revenues is 10 billion naira, and the maximum profit it has ever done is less than 800 million naira. And that does not take into consideration debt servicing, because right now it doesn't service the debts. We have another one that was established using $180 million. We paid back the debt fully. Not a single kobo of the debt servicing came from the cash flows of the business. But that company is not only, it has to depend on government to pay the salaries. So when we talk about debts, we need to understand it is our collective responsibility to say, how did we get there? And how do we change that? And as a result of that, part of what we have a responsibility as MOFI is to ensure that, one, we need to become a trusted custodian and an active manager of federal government's investments and assets. So we have to be custodian in the true sense of the word, because every government investment and asset is a commonwealth. It belongs to all of us. Someone needs to be held accountable and responsible for ensuring that decisions are being made in the best interest of Nigerians. That is one major responsibility that was given to the new MOFI. Before we spend government money to make an investment, we need to make sure that there's an investment case and that business is bankable. And when we make that investment, we need to follow through for value creation strategies and actions, holding people accountable and transparent in terms of what they do. We have to set performance targets. It cannot be business as usual. That is what it means to be a manager, an active manager for government investments and assets. We've seen what has happened in the power sector. We don't have as much power as we expect, yet none of those entities after 9 years has delivered any dividends for government's 40%. Clearly, if we continue along that line, it will be a challenge for everyone. And that is why it is so important to have a MOFI that would ensure that our assets are professionally managed, that we have visibility over what it is that government owns, and ensure that we are using that which government owns to do more. We had a meeting with the World Bank president last week, and you know what he said to us? That got us thinking. He said that you can go around the world trying to look for foreign investments, but what is important for us as a nation is domestic resource mobilization. In translation, do the most that you can with that which you have. What is it that we have? We have the investment we have made using the sweat and blood of this country, that which God has endowed us with. We have assets that are wasting away. That should be our primary responsibility in terms of mobilizing resources, domestic resource mobilization. And that's why for us, the work that we do at MOFI, in terms of ensuring that we create a national assets register, is very key. Because we have a collective responsibility to know that which we own, so we can make the most out of it. Today, when we have conversations in our public space, everybody is lamenting, oh, we owe this amount of money, we owe this amount of money. Have you asked yourself, what do we own? What are we doing with that which we own? Should we really be where we are if we're maximizing that which we own? We're all here in Lagos. You move around here, you're going to see properties owned by federal government. There are people collecting rent on those lands, going into private pockets. Government doesn't even have visibility over that. Can we do that? How sustainable is that? Now, we know that within the context of our public space, there are different government agencies and entities that have been created over time that are charged with different responsibilities. And just to be clear, all of these entities have a role to play within our economic ecosystem. And so one of them is NSIA. If you look at the act of NSIA, it's very clear. They were set up, first of all, it is a federation entity. MOFI is a federal government of Nigeria entity. Clear distinction. We know our constitution. And in fact, every state has a MOFI. The MOFI that we're part of is the federal government's MOFI. So there's no doubt as to what our role is. What is NSI's job? Is to manage the excess hydrocarbon liquidity. That is why the funds go to 3 different funds: infrastructure, stabilization, and future funds. We own about 46% of NSIA on behalf of federal government. So to all intents and purposes, NSIA is a portfolio company of MOFI. So the difference is very clear. BPE, the law establishing BPE gave them the responsibility for privatization and commercialization. And the entities for which they were supposed to transact were clearly stated in Schedule 1 and 2 of their act. It's a transaction focus. ICRC is the regulator in the PPP space. They are not the ones to manage it. If an MDA has an opportunity for a PPP, they will go to ICRC to make sure that that transaction is being conducted in line with the enabling legislation. InfraCorp, as you know, was established to be a partnership between the CBN, NSIA, and AFC to mobilize capital for infrastructure projects. And in each of these cases, we have relationships with them. NSIA, we co-invest with them, and in some cases, they manage federal government's assets on our own behalf as managers. BPE, as you know, they will transact on some of the assets that we own, and a lot of times for them to transact, they will get a power of attorney from us. ICRC, of course, they are regulating assets, the concessions and underlying assets that are owned by federal government. So it is in our interest to make sure that those assets are being managed properly and that the projected revenues from those concessions amount to what form the basis for the FBCs, the full business case. And of course, InfraCorp are funding assets that belong to federal government. So we have a relationship with them. So let me go to some of the things that we expect. So at the moment, we have about 40 of our corporate assets that are valued at net asset value of about 18 trillion naira. The expectation and the mandate we've been given is to grow that to about 100 trillion nairas in the next 10 years. Now, we can't do that without partnerships. That is one of the reasons why we're here. In fact, that 18 trillion naira does not include many of our other assets. Our infrastructure assets, our seaports, our airports are not included there. They don't include any of our mineral assets. Our intangible assets are not included there. Our real estate assets are not included there. So by the time we corporatize those and put them in ways that will have proper structure, proper governance, we believe that that is a target that we can easily meet. Now, 4 strategic pillars in terms of what we're supposed to do. One is to professionalize state ownership. Okay. Second is to help finance the economy through the revenues we're going to generate from dividends and the liquidity events that will come from us. And so anything that we're doing here at the exchange, the proceeds of there will contribute towards economic development. If we're selling parts of the stake, our stake in those entities, the proceeds from there will go towards funding them. When dividends are paid on any investments we have, they will go towards that. We are also expected to source funding for investments of government-owned entities as well as others, which is why the capital market is important. We need to begin to use the capital market to mobilize capital for projects that either our portfolio companies are doing or government wants to do. It's not everything that we have to go and borrow money. The capital market is there for us to be able to tap into it. Other countries have done it. There's really no reason why we can't. The States, I was talking to the CEO the other day, a lot of infrastructure projects in the US were developed using money from the capital market. Why can't we do the same thing? Why can't some of the capital projects in our budget be funded through funds from capital markets? We need to be deliberate and intentional about it. And that's one of the reasons why we think we should be here to do that. And of course, in terms of socioeconomic objectives of government. Right? So for us, we believe that by working with the capital market, with the exchange, the regulators, CIS, together, we can begin to mobilize capital to engage in projects that will lead to the social economic development of our country. Let me go to precisely. So from a governance standpoint, we have a governing council that is chaired by the president, some ministers as members, the CBN governor is a member, and there are 3 independent members of the council. We have a board of directors that has 6 independent members. It has myself and my colleagues, the 3 executive directors, and also has institutional representation, a deputy governor in CBN, accountant general of the federation. It has the PAMSEC finance, PAMSEC in petroleum are all members of that. And of course, we have different departments that are responsible for different things that are represented by the EDs that you have here. So what have we done so far? Again, there are a couple of things. One is we've started the enumeration for the assets register, which you've seen in the press. Our view is that by compiling that assets register, it helps us to know what we own. By knowing what we own, we can optimize them better. By knowing what we own, we know what transactions we can bring to the market to see which one we have appetite for. By knowing what we own, we can begin to use those assets as a magnet for investments to come into our country. By knowing what we own, we live up to our primary responsibility as those in government. Transparency, accountability. We need to be accountable to those who own them. We need to be transparent in terms of how we deal. And I think that the capital market provides us a platform to demonstrate that transparency. If we see we're selling 20% of an asset that we own, we believe that by bringing it to the market, we're introducing a certain level of transparency rather than doing it privately and people begin to suspect, have we sold it to our cronies? So you can see very clearly the partnership that we have there. Now, let me close by talking about what is the basis for what do we see as a relationship between us and the exchange. One is really professionalizing our MOFI entities. For any entity to go through the process to be listed, the boxes they have to check, whether it is in governance, accountability, transparency, best practices, global best practices, if they can meet your requirements, they automatically meet our own, they help us deliver on our own mandate. So it's a selfish goal. You would help us succeed. So if we build that relationship together, it's mutually beneficial. The second is access to capital. I think I've spoken about that already. That by coming to the capital market, we can use the capital market as a way to raise capital, alternative forms of capital that will help us deliver on some of our projects, whether it is on agriculture, it is on infrastructure, it is on healthcare, or it is just basic areas of transportation or logistics. We think that the market provides us the opportunity to raise that capital. And finally, we believe that if we succeed in this partnership, we would increase the number of listings on the exchange, we would deepen the market, we will inspire confidence both domestically and internationally that Nigeria is truly the giant of Africa. Because as you know, the number of listings we have and the depth of the market does not reflect the true size and the potential of our economy. And we believe that this partnership allows us to accomplish that.